Dr. Linda Rising is a PhD from Arizona State University in the field of object-based design metrics and a background that includes university teaching and industry work in telecommunications, avionics, and strategic systems. Spicy. Dr. Linda Rising, the stage is all yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to your awesome conference. And as always, if you think that this is a worthwhile presentation, you can use this information on the very first slide to ask me for a copy of the PowerPoint. There is no copyright. You are welcome to change it, translate it to a different language, or get rid of the photos or include the information that you're interested in. If you don't get a chance to ask a question today, please send me some email. I'm always happy to talk about agile or trees or how your brain works. So let's hope, yeah, it looks like the second slide is working. I'm very happy about that. So as many of you know, I had an awesome birthday this year. A couple of months ago, I turned 80. And I often get asked the question, well, what's your secret? How is it that you keep going? How is it that you keep working? How is it that you keep interested in what's going on? And I don't have an answer for that, but my best guess is that what keeps me going is exercise. I have done it all my life. I have believed that it was important. There's plenty of evidence. Now that I live in a retirement community, I can see the people around me in my community. I can see who has exercised and who has not. Who's still active and who is not. Who's still contributing, who's still learning. It does seem to be tied to physical exercise. Well, the problem is, when we hit the pandemic, I wasn't able to do that. I think exercise is something you do inside. I think it's something about going to a gym. I think it's something about using equipment. I think it's something about lifting weights. All of a sudden, the clubhouses, the gyms were closed. Now what? Well, as my husband pointed out, in our community, we have miles and miles and miles of walking trails, and we had typically not been using those. We would go to the gym instead. So now, when the pandemic hit, what a perfect solution. A way to get exercise and enjoy the walking trails. So many benefits of being outside. Even in the cold weather, we walked in the heat. I live in Middle Tennessee near Nashville. It can be hot and humid, but we also have winter, so it can be cold. So even in the cold weather, even in the warm weather, yes, even in the rain, we walked every day about 4 or 5 miles. And we got to see lots of animals. We have deer, of course, lots and lots of deer, and lots of rabbits. We also have a resident fox. This is a vixen, a mother. She's had 3 babies, and she has a nest not too far from our house, and we get to watch those babies play outside every day. We also have owls and hawks, and of course, lots and lots of trees. Now, who doesn't love trees? That's the wonderful thing about a walking trail through the forest. You get to be with the trees. And I decided I needed to learn. I didn't know much about trees. I recommend that people spend time in nature. I know the evidence that it's good for thinking, problem solving, creativity. But I'll have to admit, I didn't know much about plants. And a tree is a plant. So I just thought a forest is a collection of trees. Trees are good things. I certainly never thought of them as agile. Trees can't move, or at least they can't go far. They can sway back and forth in the wind. And certainly when we have hurricanes and tornadoes, the trees get to move around. But normally, I don't think of trees as being responsive or resilient. Turns out I was wrong. I had a chance to learn something important. If you look at the roots of any plant, a tree, or some other plant that grows in the forest, you will see what you think are the roots. But really, the white and yellow, well, they look like strings attached to the plant. That's really a fungus. A fungus is a different kind of creature. It's not a plant. It's not an animal. It's its own kingdom. So attached to the roots, and you have to look carefully, attached to the roots, you'll see a fungus. Now, a whole forest will have plants with roots, and attached to all of the roots will be a fungus that grows underground. It's so dense, it's so interconnected that if you looked under your footprint, you would see about 300 miles of mycorrhizal fungi. So we only look at what's on the surface. This is a metaphor for how we go through life. We only see what we see. We can't see the mycorrhizal fungi unless we make an effort to pull up a plant and examine the roots. And even then, we might miss the fungi. We might think it's just part of the roots of the plant, when really it's another organism entirely. I saw an article about this underground network. It was published in a very famous scientific journal called Nature. This was back in 1997, when the work of an aspiring scientist, a woman named Suzanne Simard, had identified this underground network. And in fact, she was able to show by tracing radioactive isotopes of carbon, she was able to prove scientifically that this network of fungi is involved in, well, we could say conversations, communication that happens between the trees and the other plants in the forest. She was able to demonstrate that with experiments. She was able to show how this vast underground network allows all the plants in the forest to communicate with one another. Now, it wasn't her term, but the editor of the journal said, well, this is a wood wide web. And hers was the featured article in that journal. This was just the beginning for Suzanne, but for the world. It was a chance to learn about something we cannot normally see. I encourage you to read the article. If you can't find it, please send me some email and I will be happy to send you a copy. I was also fortunate that in 2021, Suzanne wrote a new book. It's called Finding the Mother Tree. Again, one more thing for you to read. It's the story of her journey, how she, as a young scientist, had to contend with a male-dominated industry, forestry, in telling all those in that industry something they didn't know, something they didn't understand about trees, something they really needed to learn about in order to do a better job of taking care of forests. I encourage you to read this book. I encourage you to look for her many TED Talks, and you too will have a chance to learn about trees. Now, this fungus that's underground, little white and yellow threads attached to the roots of the trees and other plants in the forest, those fungi allow all the plants to communicate. The purpose for this growth, for this interconnection, is communication, is to allow survival. This is a network that evolved over thousands and thousands of years so that trees could grow tall, so the fungi could survive. They work together. They cooperate. Let's get a little technical. On the left is a plant. Most of you probably know that it exercises a process called photosynthesis, whereby it takes carbon dioxide from the air, it extracts the carbon, and it converts it into, well, we could call it a sugar or carbohydrate. And that's what it uses to build a lot of the components of the plant. But it needs so much more. It needs nitrogen, magnesium, other elements. We could say many of those are minerals. And the roots of the plant are not able to transport those minerals from the soil. Now, the fungus can access all of those minerals. Now, the problem is the fungus doesn't have any ability to convert carbon to carbohydrate. And so we have a natural setting for cooperation. Plants extract carbon and send it to the fungus. Fungus extracts minerals from the soil and sends it to the plant. And this conversation, this trading, this collaboration goes on all the time. Sometimes it's slanted in one direction, more carbon is moving to the fungus. Sometimes the minerals take over. They go back and forth, a dynamic equilibrium. So carbon moves from the plant to the fungus. Minerals move from the fungus through the roots to the plant, goes back and forth. And they tell each other, hey, I need a little more carbon. Would you send me some more sugar, please? The plant can request, I'm a little short of magnesium. Could you send me some magnesium, please? And they cooperate. They enable the survival of the other. Now, they not only do this for each other, tree and fungus, But trees also can use that underground network to communicate with each other. So tree can help tree. Tree can communicate with tree. Tree can share with other trees. But this complex adaptive system has also evolved with us to help make us better, to help us survive. So I began to look for scientific evidence that what I felt was true. I needed now some science to make sure that what I felt was really the case. First experiment I saw was done with patients in a hospital. This was randomized, controlled experiment. They randomly chose people who'd had a particular kind of surgery to be in a hospital room where a window overlooked lots of trees and green. The other group randomly selected the same kind of surgery. Well, those people were put in a room that had a window that looked out at a brick wall. And then they looked to see what would happen in this field experiment. And they found significant differences. Those who were in the room where they could see green and trees required less in the way of medication for pain, less in the way for medication for anxiety, nausea, side effects. Those who were in the room with trees didn't stay as long. Their recovery was shorter. When I read those results, which have been replicated, by the way, and are just one of many experiments showing the benefits of simply looking at trees, I thought about all of you and what you've been doing for the past 2.5 years now. What are you looking at all day? If trees, just looking at trees, if trees can help people in a hospital, imagine what they can do for you. What about the rest of us who are reasonably healthy? Are you staring at a brick wall or the equivalent? Would you be healthier and happier if you just took a little time to look at a tree? I found another study about a dreadful place in Chicago. These are high-rise apartments for low-income people. And this area was chosen because these buildings all started out with trees. They didn't have many trees, but there was a little park, a place for the children to play. And over time, some of the buildings lost the trees. Probably the managers of the apartment buildings thought, oh, it's too much trouble. When it rains, there's a lot of mud. The kids can't play there. Anyway, let's just get rid of it. Let's pave it over. Let's turn it into a parking lot. And that's what they did. So we have a field experiment. Some buildings with trees, not many, but some. Other buildings with no trees. And now let's look at the data. Can we see a difference? A difference in the lives of people who live in these buildings with trees or without. And the data was very clear. that those who had a chance to be with trees, especially if there were children, not only had measurable differences in levels of anxiety, in safety, in how well they got along with their neighbors, in the amount of crime in the buildings. They actually had records from Chicago police crime to show reduced aggression. And of course, what they couldn't measure, but we can imagine, is people were happier in the buildings where just a small chance to see trees every day. Psychologists call this attention restoration. That when we are deprived of looking at, of smelling, hearing, being in nature, then it takes a toll on our attention. It takes a toll on our ability to solve problems, be creative. We're not as good as we could be. We have evolved to be in nature, to spend a lot of time in nature. And over time, even before the pandemic, you could measure that we were, since we increasingly live in urban environments, we increasingly spend less and less time with the trees. And then, of course, when the pandemic hit, many of us were forced inside. Many of us had no access, even if we had wanted to. Many of us had no way of establishing that vital, it's vital, that means necessary for life, that vital connection with nature. You can measure the benefits of green space and trees. Creativity goes up by up to 15%. Depression goes down. Stress is reduced. Heart rate slows. Blood pressure slows. We know that trees make us all better, not just as individuals, but as a community, as a group. We see the increasing aggression around the world, no more so than in the United States, where we can't seem to do anything about having people go out and shoot other people. Yes, it's definitely a problem. No, people don't seem to care or do anything about it. Yes, it's gotten worse since we've all been inside. One of the researchers in this area is at the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. Just do a search on her name and you'll find lots and lots of interesting results. But the most interesting part of it is that before she herself started on her research, she was not a believer. She was just a graduate student looking for a topic. She said, before we started our research, I would have said, trees are nice, but we have a lot of problems. I'm not sure they're worth it. But now that I've done the research, I am convinced trees are important. Without trees, we are very different as humans. Well, Linda, this is nice, but not everybody has miles and miles and miles of walking trails. So what can you do if you live in an urban environment where, well, there might be a few trees like the buildings in Chicago, but it's not really much? What if you just have a little tiny park with 2 or 3 trees. And is there any benefit to something like that? And the answer is yes. And you don't even have to go every day. If you just visit that little green space once a week, take your children. Reduced incidence of depression, high blood pressure goes down, stress, anxiety. Children show developmental improvement just by going to a little city park once a week. I hope you're making a list of things to do, even just spending an hour. We know it improves memory, improves problem-solving ability, cognitive attention, even when it's cold, even when it's hot, even when it's raining. This compared with just getting out on the city streets and walking around. Being in an urban environment without green has no benefit. So walking outside, that's not enough. You've got to be with green space, especially trees. So it doesn't have to be much, but it does mean it's a requirement. Green space really is important. There's a long history in technology of people who spent time walking in green space. Steve Jobs and Lawrence Levy talking about Pixar were walking around the trees in Palo Alto. Before he started Amazon, Jeff Bezos spent hours in Central Park, along with a lot of other New Yorkers who love that. Yes, it's artificial. Yes, it was created intentionally, but it is green. It has lots and lots of trees. LinkedIn CEO started having walking meetings in 2012, and he strolls along a path in Mountain View, California. The list goes on. The tech giants know. The creatives already know. The major thought leaders and contributors already know. And I'll bet you already know as well. You just need a little reminder. You just need a nudge to get out there and be a part of the green space in your neighborhood. Western science has gotten in the way. It focuses on the individual. Survival of the fittest is what Darwin has reportedly said. But we have to look at how people interact with other people, just like the trees interact with other trees. It's a complex adaptive system. Our organizations are complex adaptive systems. Evolution speaks to not the individual, but the group. We have survived trees, people. We have survived not because we as individuals are the fittest, but because our groups are the fittest, because we cooperate. I think that's one of the messages of Agile, is that survival depends upon how we as a group learn, cooperate, support each other. Western science has tended to focus on you. It should have looked at your group, your family, your community, your organization. Science has given us a lot of promises. Oh yeah, the work week is going to go down to 20 hours. And instead, what do we have? We have essentially a lot of people who are slaves slaves to technology. Even when we don't have to, we spend our time staring at the equivalent of a brick wall. Our brick walls look like screens, laptop screens, screens on our phones, screens on our iPads or Kindles. We stare at those brick walls all day. And along with it, increasing physical problems, increasing mental problems, childhood developmental problems. We don't sleep as well. We're not as happy. Look at the last bullet. American and Canadian consumers buy more than 12 tons of anti-anxiety medication, 7 tons of sleeping pills, 150 tons of antidepressants every year. Well, there's a lot to be depressed about these days. I know. So one more experiment. This was done in London. There are neighborhoods in London that have their own pharmacies. Some of those neighborhoods also have green space, little parks. It's possible to look at the data. Since most people in the neighborhood attend their local pharmacy, we can see the difference in how many prescriptions for anti-anxiety and depression. We can see if there's any relationship between the number of prescriptions and whether or not that neighborhood has green space. And since I'm talking about it, you can guess there is a correlation. If there's green space, fewer prescriptions. And this is in a very big city, and those green spaces are not enormous. We're not talking about miles and miles and miles with lots of animals. We're talking about a city park. That just having access to a city park can have an impact, a measurable impact on your mental health. We know that the trees and people are not always altruistic. They're not doing this cooperation simply because they want to help other people. We know that we cannot survive unless our community is healthy. And this is exactly what you see in a forest. No single tree can be healthy if the environment is not healthy. And that was a hard lesson that Suzanne Simard brought to the forestry industry. We have to think about the community. We can't just plant row after row after row of one single kind of tree in order to harvest it months later. No, we have to encourage diversity. We have to keep old trees around because they communicate and nourish the young ones. We have to have a holistic view. We have to think about the group. Well, we know there are these connections, but what we might not realize, and Suzanne Simard was able to show us, is everything is connected. She was able to show, representing each tree as a node, that some trees are connected to every other tree in the forest. Some have a few connections, some have a lot, but some trees are exceptional. So this is one of her diagrams, and the color indicates the number of connections. So those nodes that are black, that are large, have connections to almost every other tree in the forest. Those are exceptional, unusual trees. We call them mother trees. You could also call them father trees. Those are the old trees, the trees that have been there longer than the others. And what she's able to show is that they have as their job to support the younger trees, to help them by sending them carbon, by sending them messages about how to react. Yes, trees seem to know who their kin are. That is, fir trees know about the young fir saplings. Birch trees know about the young birch saplings. Pine trees know about the youngsters. But the old mother trees, they will help everyone. And when they die, they do everything possible to share all their resources with all the young trees. So if we, in taking care of our forests, cut down these mother or father trees, we have taken the heart out of the forest. Those trees have knowledge. They have wisdom that can help the young trees be so much better. This is reportedly the oldest tree on Earth. Now, trees live so much longer than we do. This tree purportedly has been living for 5,000 years. Its name is Methuselah from the Bible. Imagine what it's learned, what it has seen, what it's been through in 5,000 years. To take a tree like that and cut it down and sell it means all that wisdom is gone. What about me? I know I talk about walking and going outside. I have lots of evidence. I talk about using your brain and problem solving. But in my quest to exercise, I never really did walk outside. I thought walking was, well, it's okay. Walking is an okay exercise, but it's not real. I thought real exercise meant going to the gym, working out with specific machines that do specific things so I could make sure I was having a balanced exercise workout. My only health issue as I get older is osteoporosis. That's a deterioration of your bones. Since I've never weighed very much, that is a factor. And I'm white. I have never smoked, so I don't have that as a problem. But nevertheless, I have several risk factors. And so several years ago, my physician said, Linda, look, I can show you the data. I know you are a scientist and you love data. And I could see clearly in the bone density reports, I was losing this battle. So I had to start taking medication. Well, the medication doesn't increase your bone density. It just keeps it from getting worse. And then the pandemic hit. And all of a sudden, I couldn't go to the gym. I couldn't lift weights. I thought, oh no, this is going to take a toll. My bones are really going to be in bad shape. What to do? I went to see my doctor after a year and a half, and she said, Linda, look at this. Look at this, your latest bone density. What are you doing? Your bone density is increasing. I'm going to take you off that medication. Whatever you're doing, Keep it up. Now I'm a believer. I think it's the trees. I think it's being outdoors. I think it's taking my own advice. This is real exercise. This is real. This is real. Going to the gym, that's second class. So my role, yes, I'm a mother tree. Indeed. I try to help the young trees. That's all of you. And when I can't, I was lucky enough to find this website, Larkspur Conservation. They do green burials. No coffins, no embalming. And someday I will get to be a tree. What can you do? Go outside. If you can't go outside, at least go to the window and look at the plants, look at the green, spend time considering. I got an email about this incredible site in Iceland. It's called Orca. It's supposed to take carbon dioxide from the air in order to address climate change. But it costs an enormous amount of money. It might not be as effective. And when I read about it, I thought, don't we already have a way of removing carbon dioxide from the air? It doesn't really cost us that much. The planet is covered with those devices. They're called trees. Maybe the best thing to do would be to take care of the trees so they could take care of us. I got an email from a friend who said, I heard your talk about trees. When the pandemic started, I had to work from home in my office, and this was what I looked at. This is the window in my office. For a year and a half, I never looked outside the window. And now the first thing I do when I come into my office in the morning is I open the blinds, I look outside. Thanks. Thanks for that. Every now and then, she sees deer. She has been missing all of that for the last year and a half. I hope you will have a list of some things you can try. It's not just about trees. It's about us. It's about our survival. It's about our growth. This is how we can all be agile. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if there are any questions. So, yes. All right.
Thank you very much, Linda. This was an amazing, not only a speech, but also a lesson, a life lesson. I really appreciate everything that you shared. The topic of seeing how the trees are connected and interconnected using or being used by fungi. Well, you never know, right? It's just amazing. It's just absolutely fantastic. On our app or Slido, we don't have any questions.
Okay.
Which is totally fine. But if I can use this word in the best way possible, I am flabbergasted by everything that you shared. So thank you very much, Linda. Thank you very much. I'm sure to go and see some trees right after this conference.
Yes. Yes. Go outside. Go outside.
The weekend is here, guys. And in Budapest, we have amazing Margaret Island. Linda, you have to come to Budapest, visit us in spring and summer or fall. Whatever.
All right.
The island is amazing. It's a beautiful place. We are expecting you here. Thank you very much for that.